Arthur Pembroke sat in the solicitor's dimly lit office, his hands clasped tightly together as if he feared they might betray his nerves. Outside, the streets of Oxford bustled with autumn life, yet inside the walls of Mr. Fletcher's chambers, silence pressed heavily. "You are the sole heir," Mr. Fletcher said, sliding a folded document across the polished desk. "Hollow Grange, in Somerset, along with its remaining possessions, are now yours." Arthur's heart gave a strange jolt. He had only visited the old manor once, when he was a boy. His late uncle, Henry Pembroke, was a man of secrets, stern and reserved, who rarely spoke at family gatherings. Arthur remembered long corridors, a smell of dust and wood smoke, and a sense that the house itself was watching him. Was his death ordinary? Arthur asked carefully. The solicitor adjusted his spectacles. The doctor's report declared it a heart failure. Yet, some matters are best left unexplored. Arthur left the office with the heavy brass key of Hollow Grange tucked into his pocket. The chill of the evening wind made him shiver, though it was not the weather alone that troubled him. Something about the inheritance felt less like a gift and more like a summons. Days later, Arthur's carriage rattled along the misty lanes of Somerset. Villagers watched him with wary eyes as he passed through the market square. An old woman selling apples leaned close to whisper to another, her gaze fixed upon him. He caught fragments of their words carried by the wind. Another Pembroke, poor soul. When the carriage reached Hollow Grange, Arthur's breath caught. The manor loomed against the grey sky, its dark stone walls streaked with ivy, windows like hollow eyes staring down. The gates groaned open as though protesting his arrival. Inside, the air was cold and stale, the scent of time and abandonment heavy in every corridor. He lit a lantern and wandered through the echoing halls, his footsteps sounding far too loud. Portraits lined the walls, faces of stern ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow him. In the great hall, a draught stirred, though no window was open. The flame of his lantern flickered violently. Then, from above, a sound broke the silence, a slow, deliberate footstep echoing from the empty corridor. Arthur froze, his heart pounding. He was certain he had come alone. Arthur held the lantern high, the trembling light spilling across the carved wooden banister. The sound had been unmistakable, footsteps, measured and heavy, as though someone lingered in the corridor above. "Is anyone there?" His voice quivered, swallowed by the silence. Only the echo answered. Slowly, he mounted the staircase, the boards creaking under his weight. Each step carried him closer to the unseen presence. Shadows leapt and twisted across the wallpaper as the lantern flame flickered. When he reached the landing, the corridor stretched long and dark, doors closed on either side like sentinels. Arthur's breath misted in the cold air. He stepped forward, the silence pressing upon him. Then it came again, a sound, but softer this time. Not footsteps, but a whisper. It brushed against his ear, though no lips were near. "Eleanor." Arthur spun around, his lantern casting frantic beams of light. The corridor was empty. His pulse thundered in his ears. He remembered the solicitor's words, "Some matters are best left unexplored." He gritted his teeth. Fear would not drive him away from what was his. With a deep breath, he opened the nearest door. The room was a bedchamber, long abandoned. Dust lay thick upon the furniture, the curtains sagged in tatters, and the air was stale with neglect. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace sat a small object. Arthur crossed the room and picked it up, a silver locket, tarnished with age. When he pressed the clasp, it opened with a faint click. Inside was a miniature portrait of a young woman, her eyes bright and filled with melancholy beauty. Beneath the portrait, a single name was etched, Eleanor. Arthur's hand trembled. Who was she? Why had her name echoed through the corridor? Before he could think further, the door behind him slammed shut with a violent crash. The lantern nearly dropped from his grasp as the room plunged into deeper shadow. And then, in the silence that followed, a woman's sigh drifted across the chamber. Arthur stood frozen, the silver locket cold in his palm. The sigh lingered in the room, faint yet undeniable, as though a presence hovered just beyond sight. "Who is there?" His voice cracked, echoing in the abandoned chamber. No answer came. Only the curtain by the window stirred as if moved by unseen hands. Arthur forced himself to breathe steadily. The rational part of his mind fought to explain it: drafts, old wood shifting, the tricks of a tired imagination. Yet his instincts whispered otherwise. He slipped the locket into his coat pocket and moved back to the door. It refused to open. He twisted the handle again and again, but the door would not yield. A chill traveled his spine. Someone, or something, wanted him to remain. Then he saw it. At the far side of the room, half hidden by the collapsed drapery, a second door stood. Unlike the first, it was smaller, framed with iron hinges that had rusted over. A heavy padlock secured it, thick with dust and cobwebs. Arthur's curiosity overcame his fear. He pulled a candlestick from the mantel and struck at the lock. The clang resounded through the chamber, and on the third blow the padlock fell to the floor with a metallic thud. He hesitated, lantern held high. The iron door creaked as it opened, releasing a stale gust of air. Beyond lay a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. A shiver passed through him. Every instinct urged him to turn back, yet something stronger compelled him forward. He stepped onto the first stone stair, the air damp and heavy, as though he were entering the lungs of the house itself. Halfway down, his lantern flame fluttered and nearly died. He shielded it with his hand, heart racing. The walls closed in, carved with strange markings, half faded by time. And then, from the shadows below, a faint sound rose, like a chain dragging slowly across stone. Arthur gripped the lantern tighter, knowing he was no longer alone. The stairwell twisted downward, the air growing colder with every step. Arthur's lantern cast a weak glow upon the damp stone walls, revealing moss and faded carvings that looked almost like symbols. The sound of the dragging chain had ceased, leaving a silence so thick he could hear his own pulse. At the bottom, the passage opened into a cellar. The ceiling was low, the air pungent with mildew. Wooden crates, collapsed with rot, lay scattered across the floor. In the corner stood an iron cage, its bars bent as though forced open long ago. Arthur's throat tightened. Why would such a thing exist beneath a family home? He lifted the lantern closer. Scratched into the stone floor within the cage were words, uneven and desperate: "Forgive me, Eleanor." His breath caught. The name again. Eleanor, whoever she was, her presence seemed stitched into the very bones of Hollow Grange. A sudden creak made him whirl round. One of the crates shifted, though no hand had touched it. Arthur stepped closer, lantern trembling, and saw something glinting beneath the debris. Brushing away the dust, he uncovered a stack of old journals bound in cracked leather. He opened the first, the ink faded yet legible. It was his Uncle Henry's handwriting. "The girl lingers still. I hear her at night. Eleanor will not leave me be. I have sealed the door, but the house remembers. Always the house remembers." Arthur's skin prickled. His uncle had known. He had lived here with the same whispers, the same haunting presence. From the shadows beyond the lantern's reach came a sudden sound, this time not a chain, nor a sigh. It was the sharp, clear laugh of a woman. Arthur spun, lantern raised high, but the cellar was empty. The laughter echoed once more, closer now, as though she were just behind him. Arthur staggered backwards, the lantern beam darting across the cellar walls. The laughter faded, leaving only the sound of dripping water echoing in the silence. His hand shook as he clutched the journals. Whatever haunted Hollow Grange was not imagination, it was real, and it wanted to be heard. He forced himself up the stone stairs, each step heavier than the last. When he emerged once more into the corridor above, he locked the iron door behind him, though he knew a simple lock could never keep the presence away. Back in the great hall, Arthur laid the journals upon a long oak table. Dust rose in soft clouds as he opened the second book. She stares at me from the walls. I have had her portrait hidden, yet the eyes remain. I cannot sleep. I cannot breathe. Eleanor, forgive me. Arthur's chest tightened. A portrait. The manor was filled with portraits of his ancestors, stern faces staring down through the years. Which one of them was hers? Lantern in hand, he moved from room to room, scanning each frame. At last, in the drawing room, half shrouded by a drape, he found it. A large canvas, the paint darkened by dust and time. He pulled back the cloth. The young woman looked out at him, her face delicate, her eyes deep pools of sorrow. It was the same face from the locket. Eleanor. Arthur reached out, brushing the dust from the frame. As his fingers touched the gilded wood, the air in the room shifted. A low whisper filled the space, curling around him like smoke. You found me. Arthur froze, his hand still on the frame. The eyes in the painting gleamed as if alive, catching the flicker of his lantern. And then, so soft it could almost be mistaken for imagination, the painted lips began to move. Arthur's breath caught as he staggered back, the lantern nearly slipping from his grip. The lips on the painted face parted ever so slightly, and a voice, soft, aching, spilled into the room. Free me. The sound was not loud, yet it filled every corner of the chamber, as though the very walls carried her plea. Arthur's pulse thundered. Who are you? He whispered, though he already knew the answer. The eyes in the portrait seemed to glisten. Eleanor. The lantern flame guttered, throwing the room into restless shadow. Arthur pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. Was this madness? Had the solitude and dread of Hollow Grange driven him to imagine voices? And yet the locket, the journals, the inscription on the cellar floor, all spoke the same name. He forced himself to look again at the portrait. The woman's sorrowful gaze held his own, as if pleading across centuries. Free me, before he returns. Arthur stiffened. He glanced at the journals lying on the table. His Uncle Henry had written of her, tormented by whispers and visions. But the words before he returns chilled Arthur to the bone. Who was she speaking of? Before he could ask, a loud crash shook the hall. Somewhere above, a door had slammed open with such force that dust drifted from the ceiling. Arthur spun towards the staircase, heart hammering. The house had awakened. From the shadowed landing above came the unmistakable echo of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching the great hall. Arthur gripped the lantern tightly, its flame quivering as the footsteps grew louder. He stood rooted to the spot, the portrait of Eleanor looming behind him, her painted eyes glimmering with silent urgency. Who is there? Arthur called, his voice echoing through the great hall. The footsteps halted. For a moment there was silence, thick and suffocating. Then, slowly, a figure appeared at the top of the staircase. Arthur's heart lurched. It was his Uncle Henry. Pale, gaunt, and draped in the same clothes Arthur had last seen him wear years ago. His face bore the grey hue of the grave, yet his eyes burned with a dreadful vitality. You should not have come here, Arthur, the figure said, his voice low, heavy with an echo that did not belong to the living. The house remembers, and so do I. Arthur staggered back, nearly dropping the lantern. His mind reeled. His uncle was dead. He had stood at the funeral, seen the coffin lowered into the ground. This is not possible, Arthur whispered. The figure descended one step, then another, each footfall sending shivers through the hall. You have awakened her, Henry continued. Eleanor must remain. She cannot leave. Do you understand? If she is freed, the curse binds itself anew. Arthur's breath came in sharp gasps. The words, the journals, the laughter, the whispers, they all twisted together into a knot of dread. His uncle was not just a victim of Eleanor. He was her jailer. Arthur turned instinctively towards the portrait. Eleanor's lips trembled as though forming silent words. Her painted hand seemed to press against the canvas, straining to break free. Behind him, Henry's voice thundered with rage. "You will not release her." The lantern flame flared wildly, throwing the room into chaos of light and shadow. The lantern flickered violently, its light casting Arthur's shadow tall and trembling against the walls. Henry's figure loomed at the foot of the staircase, his eyes burning with fury that seemed older than the grave itself. "You cannot save her," Henry hissed. "This house will consume you, as it consumed me." Arthur clenched his jaw. His heart thundered, yet something within him, perhaps born of Eleanor's pleading eyes, held firm. He turned fully towards the portrait. Eleanor's painted lips moved again, more urgently now. Though no sound escaped, Arthur understood. He lifted the locket from his pocket, the one he had found hidden beneath the cellar floor. The moment he held it towards the portrait, the entire hall seemed to shudder. Dust fell from the rafters, and Henry let out a cry of rage. "Do not!" But Arthur pressed the locket against the canvas. At once, a blinding light tore through the painting. The figure of Eleanor seemed to swell, her sorrowful expression softening into relief as the canvas rippled like water. A wind howled through the hall, pulling at Arthur's clothes, extinguishing the lantern in his hand. Henry staggered forward, his form flickering like a dying flame. "She is bound to me," he roared, his voice echoing like thunder. "If she is freed, I am undone." The canvas split with a sound like tearing fabric. From within, Eleanor's figure emerged, no longer paint, but flesh and spirit entwined, radiant and free. She stepped forward, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Henry screamed, a cry of rage and despair, as his form crumbled into nothingness, dissolving into the shadows of the hall. Then silence. The great house of Hollow Grange seemed to breathe one last sigh, its walls settling, its echoes fading. The weight of centuries lifted. Arthur fell to his knees, the broken canvas hanging limply behind him. When he looked up again, Eleanor was gone, vanished into the night, or perhaps into peace at last. Only the faint scent of roses lingered in the air.